The year is 1996, and the Vietnam War is still fresh in America's collective memory. This is Platoon.
We've been kicking other people's asses for so long, I figure it's time we got ours kicked. What happened today is just the beginning. We're gonna lose this war.
If you're gonna get killed in Vietnam, it's better to get it in the first few weeks. I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm so tired. I think I've made a big mistake coming here.
We're going back into that NBA bunker complex tomorrow.
This gook's a lot smarter than you think.
Well, out there's the beast. He's hungry tonight.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Movie Punditry. This is Mike with another episode of Random Rewatch, and we are doing Oliver Stone's 1996 war epic Platoon, starring Tom Berenger, Charlie Sheen, and Willem Dafoe. So as I said in the cold open, you know, in the mid-'80s, the Vietnam War was still very fresh in the collective memory of America. A lot of the people who are working in Hollywood, writers, producers, especially writers, had been young men during the Vietnam era, and a lot of them, like Oliver Stone, served in Vietnam. And so we were starting to see movies and television shows coming out that were addressing the idea of what things were like in Vietnam, or what things were like for people who are returning from Vietnam. And so you have just randomly, you have movies like Rambo or Missing in Action, or, you know, even films like something like Blue Thunder, which is not directly a Vietnam movie, but deals with people who are veterans of Vietnam making their way into modern life. A lot of TV shows you had people who were Vietnam vets. The A-Team is a great example of that. Films that dealt directly with the Vietnam War that took place during the Vietnam War were a little bit rarer. The big kahuna being, of course, Apocalypse Now. But Apocalypse Now was, well, in the first place, it was much more an adaptation of Heart of Darkness than an original story. And it was also a very psychedelic, psychological kind of film that was told from a very unreliable narrator in the person of Willard. Deer Hunter was another big one that had come out fairly recently, but that dealt more with PTSD than the actual war itself, you know, what it was like coming home from the war and having to deal with everything. Platoon is really kind of the first film that we get that's a look into what it was like during the Vietnam War for the average kind of soldier on the ground. You know, there were other movies like The Green Berets, which was basically a propaganda piece, and other movies that kind of took place that deal with like higher echelons of command and officers and things like that. But in terms of just boots on the ground, grunts in foxholes, in jungles, this was kind of really the first film that we had with that. This comes out in December of 1986, and then 7 months later, Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket comes out. So this is two kind of back-to-back films about the Vietnam War released within a year of each other that are really kind of exploring what it's like for people who actually fought the war at a low level, the soldiers on the ground. And we're going to talk a lot about the comparison between Full Metal Jacket and Platoon as we go through this. So Oliver Stone, kind of an interesting guy, was born in New York right after World War II, wound up attending Yale University, actually a couple times I think, but much like Taylor in the movie, he dropped out of Yale University and enlisted in the Army and requested to be sent to Vietnam. And he was not, you know, this is not one of those rear echelon guys. He served on a frontline unit in the 25th Infantry. He was wounded twice, received a Bronze Star for Valor, 2 Purple Hearts, a couple other decorations. So he's very much the Taylor in this film. This is kind of autobiographical. Obviously, as far as we know, not the more extreme story elements that went on in this, but in terms of his experience as being a soldier, this is really it. And Taylor is really telling Oliver Stone's story. After he's wounded twice, he gets out of the war, he's sent home. He winds up enrolling in NYU, and he gets a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Film. One of his instructors while he was there is Martin Scorsese. He had a short film, it was 12 minutes, called Last Year in Vietnam. And then he wound up writing a script called Break, which was kind of the genesis of his later larger script for Platoon. He wrote kind of a small horror film that he also directed in 1973 called Seizure. And then he is the screenwriter on a film called Midnight Express in 1978, which is an adaptation of a novel about a student who is sent to prison in Turkey for trying to smuggle hashish out of the country. He wins an Oscar. Oliver Stone wins an Oscar for his script for Midnight Express, and his career is off and running. He writes a couple more films, including Conan the Barbarian, Scarface, the Al Pacino Scarface, Year of the Dragon. He directs a film called The Hand. He directs a film called Salvador. He wrote both of those films as well. Then his script for Platoon, or Break Platoon, gets into the hands of the De Laurentiis production company. They were able to find some financing to produce the film, but they could not find a distribution partner. John Daly, who had produced Salvador, took on production of Platoon and agreed to finance it. James Woods, who had starred in Salvador, was initially considered for a role in this, and Oliver Stone wanted him for a role in this. However, James Woods said he was not going to go into another jungle with Oliver Stone. So that tells us a little bit about the experience filming Salvador, which was about a journalist who covered the Salvadorian Civil War. So casting starts for this film. There's a lot of casting possibilities of people who are involved in possibly being in this. Denzel Washington was originally interested in the role of Elias, but I think that Stone was actually pretty interested from the beginning in Dafoe. Dafoe had been in a movie in 1984 called Streets of Fire, which nobody remembers anymore. It was a Walter Hill film. This thing was all over the place, largely due to some music videos that were in heavy rotation on MTV. This was like one of the first big MTV movies that was really kind of promoted on this. It was like a gang crime story, but it was also a musical sort of thing. And it was really kind of a big flash. There was a lot of buzz around it. There's a lot of buzz around Dafoe's performance in it. He was kind of the big bad guy named Shattuck. So he's in Platoon. For Barnes, they looked at Mickey Rourke, who I think at that point in his career, he probably would have been great as Barnes. They also looked at Emilio Estevez. They looked at Kevin Costner. That would have been another interesting choice. Costner apparently didn't want to do it because his brother had been in Vietnam, and he didn't want to kind of connect that or make his brother relive, any of his experiences. Berenger, at that point, he was kind of mainly known for Eddie and the Cruisers and also The Big Chill. So you've got this thing where, he comes in, he's kind of the stereotypical good guy in movies, and he's playing the bad guy in this movie, and Dafoe, who's best known for being a bad guy, comes in and he's one of the good guys in this film. So there's this interesting kind of juxtaposition in the way that these guys are cast. Dafoe apparently had made the suggestion about Charlie Sheen for Taylor. They originally were looking at Keanu Reeves for Taylor, and Keanu Reeves turned it down because he thought the film was too violent. You heard that right. John Wick turned down doing Platoon because he thought the film was too violent. I guess he was at a different point in his career. So anyway, Dafoe apparently recommends Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen comes in and reads for it. There was another actor who came in and read for it, and Oliver Stone came in to read for it, and apparently Oliver Stone took one look at this actor and said, "Oh, you're cute," and wouldn't even let him read for it. And that actor was Ben Stiller, and he apparently did not take this very well, and a lot of Tropic Thunder winds up being kind of a satire of the production of Platoon, whether people know that or not. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Another big casting in this was Dale Dye. Some of you may be saying, who's Dale Dye? You all know him. He's been in a dozen movies that I guarantee you've seen. He's kind of this guy, the white-haired guy who always plays like a government bureaucrat or a military guy. You know, films like Under Siege or Mission Impossible. And he was not only a consultant on this film, but he played the captain, the platoon's commanding officer in this film. But he was the consultant for this film for Oliver Stone, and he puts the actors through a boot camp. And Dale Dye, like Oliver Stone, Dale Dye is definitely the real guy. He enlisted in 1964. He got sent to Vietnam in 1965. So he was one of the early guys in Vietnam. He was a combat correspondent, which means that he was implanted with multiple units at multiple times. So this wasn't a guy who just went in, saw a couple of battles for a year, or a year and a half, and then tapped out and went home and was in one place. This guy was all over the country, going to hot spots, and was basically constantly under fire during his whole time in Vietnam. 2 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star for Valor. You know, this Dale Dye is definitely the real deal. And he puts all the actors through this boot camp for a couple of weeks before the filming starts, where they're sleeping in tents, they're eating rations, they're marching, they're doing forced marches under full pack, they are standing night watches, they are learning how to use the weapons that an infantryman would have in Vietnam at those times. There's one story that goes that he had set up a night watch with, I think, Johnny Depp, who was very young Johnny Depp, and Charlie Sheen and a couple other people. He had taught them how to use an M60, which is that big 30 caliber machine gun that you see they like to use in movies. You know, the one where Rambo is like holding it with one hand with the belt wrapped around his other hand. So the trick to using that gun is you do 8-round bursts with it. It's just like, a couple of seconds and you got to let off it. And this is for a couple of reasons. One is the barrel gets too hot and the gun will jam. The other is you go through your ammunition really quickly because it's got a very high cyclic rate. The third one is because there are tracer rounds on the belt, the enemy, if you constantly hose fire, the enemy will be able to see where you are. And so you're supposed to do short, like 8-round bursts, move a little bit, do another burst, that type of thing. That's the tactics that he taught these guys. And then apparently he had them out on some kind of night watch where they were, had to stay awake all night and guard the camp. And he found a herd of goats and he ran the goats in the middle of the night through their position. And they basically hosed with this gun, which was full of blanks. There were no goats herd, injured in the training of these actors. But apparently they just basically hosed through all their ammunition in like 30 seconds. And, that was an opportunity for him to explain that this is why you don't do that, because now you're completely vulnerable if you get overrun. But it did go to a long way towards building a camaraderie with the various actors. And another thing that they did that was interesting during the course of the movie was that they filmed this movie sequentially. That normally doesn't happen. Normally they will go to a location, they will film all the scenes for that location, and then they'll move the whole production to another place and they'll film, or it's based on actor availability or whatever. But movies are very often shot wildly out of order, and then in the edit they're assembled and put together in the way that they should go. This film was shot largely sequentially, and one of the effects that it had was that as a character in the film dies, he leaves. So Willem Dafoe's character Elias, he dies in the middle of the film. Willem Dafoe packs up and he's heading home. And I should mention that this film was shot in the Philippines during the revolution, so it was a pretty difficult shoot anyway. And these guys are exhausted. Dale Dye is driving them crazy. He's keeping them up all night, and he's they're not eating particularly well, and they're just tired, they're exhausted, they're going through all this. So these guys, when their characters are killed, they just leave and they go home. And so to the actors who are left remaining, it very much feels like these guys died because they're not part of this experience anymore. One of the other things is that the scene with Charlie Sheen's character Taylor getting off the chopper was one of the first things that was shot. So this sense of nobody knows who this guy is actually real. This is not, oh, we've been working with him for 6 months and we know this guy inside and out. It's like, yeah, we just met this dude. You know, we spent a couple of weeks with, some of us spent a couple of weeks with him in this camp, but we don't really know this guy. And so the awkwardness that is involved in those first early scenes is actually legitimate because it's all these actors who are getting to know one another and trying to figure out, you know, who they are. I'm reminded kind of the way John Landis set up Animal House, where he had the Delta House. Those guys all stayed in one hotel, and the guys who played the other house stayed in a different hotel. And the guys in the Delta House, like Landis was like basically encouraging them to party all the time. And so those guys drew really close, and the other guys were, you know, they didn't know the other guys because they didn't stay in the same hotel with them. And so there was this natural kind of awkwardness or animosity between the two factions. It's kind of a similar thing. These guys come together and they don't know each other. And so it's a really interesting kind of take on how to get your actors prepared. Very method. One other casting note is John McGinty, who is a Oliver Stone kind of staple. You know, he was in this, he was in Wall Street, he was in Talk Radio, he was in Nixon. You know, this is a guy, he was in, I think, a couple other Oliver Stone films. Any Given Sunday he was in. So this is a guy that Stone loves to work with. And the other thing is 6 months prior, we talked about Full Metal Jacket coming out 7 months after. 7 months prior to Platoon releasing is Top Gun, which is a huge, again, military film. So you have this kind of bombastic rah, rah, rah thing in Top Gun, and then later that year you have this big kind of downer in Platoon. So let's get going and let's get into this film. So we start this movie, as I mentioned, with Taylor getting off the plane, arriving at the base camp of his platoon, and he is pretty much a blank page to us. We don't know anything about him. There's no backstory. None of the other people know anything about him either. So this is kind of that whole thing that Stone is doing, is bringing in this character, and we are learning about this character as the characters around him are learning about him. And so that's a pretty interesting technique. And so right away we get the sense of this chaos that's going on. It's one of the things that Stone does here that is really the first time that you see this in a war movie. It's really common now, but this was really groundbreaking. And at the time, is this idea of these battle scenes, especially, just being ridiculously chaotic and all these different things going along, and you're not really being able to get an idea of what's happening in all the different things as characters come in and out, as situations come in and out. Obviously, it's really a common trope now in movies like Saving Private Ryan or 1917, or in shows like, you know, Game of Thrones, the obvious one being the Battle of the Bastards in season 6, where there's just all this crazy stuff going on and happening. But traditionally in war movies, you would get something that was a lot more methodical, a lot more slower paced, so that you had an idea of kind of the geography of what the battle was, who was where, who the good guys were, who the bad guys were. These guys they're coming down the hill. These guys are trenched in over here, or these ships are coming through a strait, and the submarine is hiding over here. there's always this kind of idea of where everybody was in the battle. And so even in like Apocalypse Now, where, you have that battle, that great battle scene where, the helicopter cavalry, Kilgore's group, comes in and attacks the beachhead. There was still a sense of you knew what everything was going on. But in this, there's just all these quick cuts, and there's all, it's dark. You can't really see clearly. They keep jumping back and forth to other people. There's really no sense of geography, really, of where everybody is. You see your characters, you see Taylor, but you don't know exactly where he is in relation to where the enemy is or where the other guys are. And so it's very disorienting. It's very confusing. But to truth be told, that's the way those battles were, actually. There's really no heroes in this story. I mean, yeah, Taylor is our protagonist. He's our point of view character. He's the guy we're following through this story. But he's not a great guy. I mean, he's looking to kill Barnes, and try to get a group of guys together to take justice into their own hands. Certainly Barnes is not a good guy. Elias, maybe you can make the argument he's a pretty good guy, but he's also, him and the other potheads, King and the other people, they're just looking to escape. They're not really dealing with anything. Elias does go and kind of do that final mission, and he does kind of sacrifice himself for everybody. He's probably the closest thing in the story to actually a heroic act. But you get the feeling that none of these people are really good people, and nobody is really all that selfless. Barnes is another one we don't have any real backstory on him, but we have those scars on his face. There is a backstory. You just don't know what it is. And that he has a history because he has this legend about him that he can't be killed. And that's been hard won over years and probably passed down from, this guy's been with Barnes for a year. The new guy comes in. The old guy goes home. The new guy's been with him for a year. And everybody, the story just kind of keeps growing and growing and growing till people actually get to that point. But there's always this kind of feeling of uncertainty, of danger, of we don't know what's going to happen next, whether it's in the battle scene or whether it's even in the interpersonal scenes. There's the scene where, like I said, Taylor is trying to talk the guys into killing Barnes after the village incident, and you turn around and Barnes is there. So now you don't know what's going to happen there. When Barnes and Elias face off, you don't really know which way it's going to go. Even the captain, that's played by Dale Dye, seems kind of ambivalent to a lot of what's going on around him, and he's just looking to get the mission done. He's like, yeah, you get back up on that ridge, you go back in that foxhole, you just deal with it, because it's the way it's going to be. And then, of course, there's the lieutenant, who's just completely incompetent. So he's relying heavily on Barnes and Elias to actually run the platoon for him. But he eventually gets to the point where he just checks out. He just doesn't care anymore. And he doesn't want to hear anything from anybody. It's like, look, we got the orders. They said to go down here and do this, hold that position, take that hill, go through that woods. That's just what we're going to do. Just shut up and do it.
Yeah, Ramucci. Looks like you got Elias' squad now.
Squad, sir. I know we're still referring to this platoon in terms of squads.
All right, look. I want you to take those two holes right there and there. You're tying it off with Barnes up here, King down there.
Yeah. Begging your pardon, sir. My two holes are far enough apart you can run a regiment through them and never see it. I have 5 live bodies left, sir.
Look, I don't want to hear your problems, Ramucci. You get new men any day. Meantime, you make do like everybody else, okay?
I didn't ask for this job.
I don't want to hear it.
Oh, you don't want to hear it?
Yeah, that's right. I don't want to hear it, because to tell you the truth, I don't give a shit, okay? Just don't give a flying f*** anymore.
Right.
You see these characters kind of descending into their basic instincts, their animalistic instincts, especially in the village. They get into that village, and Barnes starts interrogating that elder, and then his wife comes. The wife's dead, but now you see that the other soldiers in the unit are starting to throw the rules away and just do whatever they want. You know, Taylor breaks up the gang rape. There's just all kinds of things. And the captain is like, well, if I find out there's been a murder, there'll be a court-martial. I don't know if you believe him or not, you know, or if he's just saying that because that's the thing that needs to be said, or you really think maybe at that point you really think, yeah, okay, he's a good guy, but then by the time you get to the end, you're kind of like, you know what, he wouldn't have done anything because that would just take soldiers off his line. So, you know, probably nothing would have happened. So the real question is, when you watch a film like this, how do you feel about it, and what do you come out feeling? Francois Truffaut, who is a very famous French New Wave director, he's an extremely influential director. A lot of people who go to film school, especially in the 70s and that period of time, studied Truffaut. He very famously said that every war film, even if it's an anti-war film, it's a pro-war film. And I think what he means by that is that in order to show war, you have to have these battle scenes, and there's going to be some portion of your audience, some portion of the viewership of your art who is going to be titillated by the action in this battle scene, even if you show it to be somewhat horrific. So, you know, for instance, you got somebody watching Apocalypse Now. You got 100 people watching Apocalypse Now. Not Apocalypse Now. Sorry, Apocalypse Now. You got 100 people watching Apocalypse Now, which is, you know, definitely kind of an anti-war message in the film. But out of those 100 people, you know, there's going to be 5 guys who are like, yeah, Charlie don't surf.
I like, and you can get any place up that river that suits you, young captain. Hell, a 6-foot peak. All right, take a gunship back to the division. Lance, go with Mike, let him pick out a board for you, and bring me my Yater spoon, the 8.6.
I don't know, sir.
What is it, soldier?
Well, I mean, it's pretty hairy in there. It's Charlie's point.
Charlie don't surf!
Or you have 100 people watching Full Metal Jacket, and there's going to be a bunch of guys in there who are going to be like, ha ha, yeah, you just don't lead them so much.
Ha ha! Anyone who runs is a VC. Anyone who stands still is a well-disciplined VC. You guys ought to do a story about me sometime.
Why should we do a story about you?
Because I'm so good. That ain't no shit either. I've done got me 157 dead kills. And 51 of buffaloes too. Them are all certified.
Any women or children?
Sometimes.
How can you shoot women and children?
Easy. You just don't lead them so much. Ain't war hell?
So there's always going to be some portion of your audience that's going to kind of just get off on the action and not understand the messaging of it. Like a film like Starship Troopers or something like that, where Paul Verhoeven is definitely satirizing and commenting and critiquing this idea of ultra-nationalism and ultra-patriotism and ultra-masculinity. And a lot of people didn't get it. They just thought it was like a cool action movie where we're killing bugs. On the other hand, Steven Spielberg, who was a friend of Truffaut, he put Truffaut in Close Encounters. The French guy in Close Encounters is Francois Truffaut. Spielberg's position is that every war movie is an anti-war movie. Apparently he hasn't seen the Green Berets. But I think, no, seriously, I think what he means is that you're showing the atrocities of war, and reasonable people will look at that and go, no, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be a part of one of these battles. I don't want to be a part of Apocalypse Now. I don't want to be a part of Saving Private Ryan. There's nothing glorious in that. There's nothing glorious in death and the horrors of war. So reasonable people can disagree on things, and perhaps it's a little bit of both. You know, that every war movie, you are going to get some people who are titillated by the action and drives them into, you know, this kind of war fervor, whereas others are just going to be completely horrified by it. I'm thinking about Oliver Stone's, one of his next movies is Born on the 4th of July, which is, another part of his, one of his Vietnam movies. Tom Cruise in 86, less than a year before Platoon comes out, is making Top Gun, and Top Gun was a huge recruiting tool for the Navy. A lot of people signed up for military service because of that movie, and I think Tom Cruise maybe felt some kind of way about it, which is why he agreed to do Born on the 4th of July, which is dealing with the aftermath of war and what it means to come back and have to live with the scars, both the physical and mental scars of that kind of thing. And Cruise never really made another movie like Top Gun until, a couple years ago, where they backed a dump truck full of money up to his house, and then he made Top Gun Maverick. He definitely went through a period of time where he was almost kind of making up for the jingoism of a movie like Top Gun. And don't get me wrong, I love Top Gun, but it definitely sits a certain way in the zeitgeist, and it certainly makes a certain statement about militarism and patriotism that perhaps some people in Hollywood are not particularly comfortable with in this day and age. I think a really interesting comparison to make on this film is comparing this film with Full Metal Jacket, which came out a few months later. Personally, I think Full Metal Jacket is the better film. Both of these films are fairly similar in structure, although obviously you have that first half of Full Metal Jacket, which is, the boot camp sequences. But Platoon's also got kind of that split in the middle, kind of before and after the village scene, before and after Elias's death, really. It kind of takes on a new tone and a new feeling. It's not as abrupt as it is in Full Metal Jacket, but I think our characters, our protagonists, go through a similar arc. If you compare, Taylor in this film and Joker in Full Metal Jacket, both of them wind up in this situation where they kind of lose some of their humanity. Taylor winds up at the end of the film killing Barnes in cold blood. Joker winds up at the end of Full Metal Jacket killing the sniper in cold blood. He didn't have to kill her. He could have captured her. Taylor could have captured Barnes. He could have walked away from Barnes and let Barnes, because Barnes was going to die anyway. Probably. The sniper was going to die anyway. Probably. There was no reason for either one of these men to kill these people, but they both did. And I think they both did out of a similar drive, this idea of just seeing evil and facing it. Now, it's much more clear-cut in Barnes's case. Barnes is a bad dude, and he definitely does evil things. And he's a grown man, and he's going to take responsibility for what he did, one way or the other. Full Metal Jacket, it's a little more ambiguous because they find the sniper, and as you're watching this movie, especially if you're watching the movie for the first time, you're thinking that it's some NVA guy up in one of those buildings because of the lethality and the savagery of what's going on and how they are, shooting these soldiers on the ground. And then when you finally find out it's this young girl, that's there designed to make you feel maybe some kind of empathy for her. You're not feeling empathy for Barnes anyway, but maybe you're feeling some kind of empathy for this girl. Both of these people, kind of egg on to kill him. Barnes is like, shoot me, do it. And the girl is saying, shoot me.
Get me a medic. Go on, boy. Do it.
Or kill me. And, both Taylor and Joker, they both do. And I think it's because they have sunk to their basis level. War has made them the least that a man can be. And by man, I mean a human being. The least a human being can be. They are at their basest level. And life almost becomes insignificant to them. Or these people become insignificant to them. And I think that's part of what Spielberg was trying to say when he said that all war movies are anti-war movies. So this film had a $6 million budget, made $138 million. It went from a very limited release to a wide release after 7 weeks. It did big business in VHS and DVD rentals, all those releases. It was a really popular movie in the kind of the secondary market, the post-theatrical release market. It's getting an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got a 92 on Metacritic. It's got an A on CinemaScore. 4 out of 4 stars. Roger Ebert. He called it the best film of the year. Gene Siskel also gave it 4 out of 4 stars and said that Vietnam veterans identify with it. I usually stick to them, but I'm gonna read a little bit of another review. Pauline Kael, who's a very well-known and influential film critic during this time. She wrote for The New Yorker from the late 60s until about 1991. She wrote about it. The film has been widely acclaimed, but some may feel that Stone takes too many melodramatic shortcuts. There's too much filtered light, too much poetic license, too damn much romanticized insanity. The movie crowds you. It doesn't leave you room for an honest emotion. I'm going to say that is a feature, not a bug. I think the fact that the movie does crowd you, that it does not leave you time to process thought or emotion, that it is romanticized insanity, to quote Pauline Kael, that's what makes this movie so strong. Because, as I said before, you never saw things like that in the movies before that. I'm going to agree with Pauline Kael's assessment of this film, but I'm going to disagree with her in that I don't think that makes it a bad film. That's actually, I think, one of the movie's strengths. So that is Platoon. Just a little bit of follow-up. It was a big, obviously, a big Oscar darling. It won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Editing, Best Sound. It was nominated. Both Berenger and Dafoe were nominated for Best Supporting Actor. It was nominated for Screenplay and Cinematography. It won a Best Direction Award at the BAFTAs. It won a DGA Award. Best Motion Picture Drama at the Golden Globes. Berenger won a Golden Globe. It won a whole bunch of other awards. This was a really popular film, and it was at its time, it was a really important film. And if you haven't seen it, it's one of those films that you really need to watch. It's an important film, and everybody needs to see it. So that's it for Platoon. I already pulled our next year. It's going to be 1998. I don't know what movie I'm going to do. Be sure to listen to our Green and Black series. House of the Dragon Season 2 is out, and we are doing weekly recaps and reviews of that. We've got the main show coming up. We're available. This series, the Random Rewatch and Green and Black, are available also on YouTube as audio only, but some people prefer to listen there. And please just let people know about this podcast if you like it. Thank you.